She saved the CEO's lost dog, and he treated her with disdain until he... What is the true price of kindness? Is doing the right thing still worth it when you're met with nothing but contempt? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below, and watch until the end to see the shocking reason this powerful CEO suddenly changed his mind. As dawn broke over the sprawling canyons of New York City, it seemed like just another ordinary day. For Amelia Reed, it began the same way it always did, with the jarring shriek of her alarm clock. But this day would be anything but ordinary, because as her eyes focused on the glowing red numbers, her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She was a full 30 minutes late. A gasp escaped her lips as she threw the thin comforter off her legs, her feet hitting the cold laminate floor of her studio apartment. Every morning was a frantic ballet of survival, but today the choreography was dangerously off schedule. Her job as a junior administrative assistant at Sterling & Finch, one of New York's most prestigious and ruthless marketing firms, didn't just frown upon lateness, it punished it. Mr. Thompson, her manager, had a stare that could curdle milk and a special talent for making examples out of people. He had once remarked, "Punctuality isn't just about being on time, it's a reflection of character, or a lack thereof." "Character," Amelia muttered to herself, pulling on a simple, wrinkle-resistant dress she'd laid out the night before. "Easy for you to say from your corner office." Her life was a tightly wound coil of responsibilities. There was the rent for the shoebox apartment, the crushing weight of student loans, and most importantly, the ever-present medical bills for her mother's ongoing treatment back in Ohio. Every dollar was accounted for, every minute scheduled. There was no room for error, no safety net. Being fired wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a catastrophe. She skipped makeup, ran a brush through her brown hair, and grabbed a pre-packaged granola bar from the counter, ignoring the small stack of bills next to it. As she locked her apartment door, she glanced at her phone. 8:12 a.m. She had to be at her desk, logged in and smiling by 8:30 a.m. It was a 25-minute subway ride on a good day. Today was not a good day. The city air hit her like a physical force, a chaotic symphony of honking taxis, distant sirens, and the hurried footsteps of a million other people running their own races. Amelia joined the current, her worn-out flat slapping against the pavement as she half-jogged, half-walked toward the subway station 3 blocks away. She was mentally rehearsing her apology, a mix of feigned illness and technical difficulties. Maybe a sudden but brief power outage? No, too elaborate. A delayed train? Plausible but unoriginal. It was then, as she was about to dart across a crosswalk, that she saw it. A golden blur of fur and panic. A magnificent golden retriever, his leash dragging behind him, was weaving confusedly through the legs of indifferent pedestrians. He let out a soft, frightened whimper that was almost lost in the urban cacophony. He looked up, his big brown eyes filled with a desperate confusion that resonated with a part of her she couldn't ignore. "Keep walking," the logical part of her brain screamed. "You are going to be fired. Think of your mom. Think of the bills." She took a step toward the subway. But then the dog whimpered again, a sound so full of vulnerability it cut through her anxiety. She pictured the dog darting into the street, the screech of tires. She pictured him lost forever, a loving family somewhere heartbroken. With a groan of internal conflict, she turned around. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, kneeling down so not to spook him. "Hey there, it's okay. Where did you come from?" The dog, seeming to sense a friend, tentatively wagged his tail and nudged her hand with his wet nose. Amelia smiled, her stress melting away for just a second. Around his neck was a thick leather collar with a small, polished silver plate. She gently turned it over. The engraving was elegant, the letters sharp and clear. Zeus. If found, please call. Or better yet, just bring me home. Penthouse A, the Grand Elysian Tower.
Amelia's eyes widened. The Grand Elysian. It wasn't just an apartment building. It was a landmark of obscene wealth on the Upper East Side, a glittering monument to the city's 1%. It was also in the complete opposite direction of her office. She checked her phone again. 8:21 a.m. A cold dread washed over her. There was no way. She couldn't do it. Returning the dog meant, at best, an hour-long detour. It meant facing Mr. Thompson not just late, but spectacularly, unforgivably late. It meant, very possibly, the end of her job. She looked from the engraved address to the trusting eyes of the dog, Zeus. Her own mother had always told her, "Amelia, what you do when no one is watching is who you really are." For a fleeting moment she saw her boss's furious face, then her mother's kind one. The choice was painful, but in her heart, it wasn't a choice at all. "Okay, Zeus," she sighed, taking hold of the leash. "Looks like you and I are going on an adventure." She turned her back on the subway station and started walking toward the part of the city she had only ever seen in magazines. The walk to the Grand Elysian Tower felt like crossing into another country. With every block, the scenery transformed. The modest brick buildings of her neighborhood gave way to elegant brownstones, which in turn were dwarfed by soaring glass skyscrapers that seemed to scrape the clouds. The people changed, too. The frantic, hurried energy of the morning commuters was replaced by a calm, leisurely confidence. Women in designer coats walked dogs that were smaller and more impeccably groomed than Zeus, and men in tailored suits spoke quietly into their phones about millions of dollars. Amelia, in her simple department store dress and scuffed flats, felt her own invisibility shift from a protective city camouflage to a glaring spotlight of inadequacy. Zeus, however, seemed to know exactly where he was going, pulling eagerly on the leash as if guided by an invisible thread home. Finally, she stood before it. The Grand Elysian was less a building than a declaration of power. A stoic, uniformed doorman stood guard under a massive bronze canopy, his posture as rigid as the steel beams that held the tower up. He had a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and trained to spot anyone who didn't belong. His eyes scanned Amelia from head to toe, and his expression confirmed her deepest fear. He had already judged and dismissed her. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his voice polite, but with an unmistakable edge of suspicion. It was a tone that said, "Are you lost?" Amelia's throat felt dry. I found a dog," she stammered, gesturing down to Zeus, who was now wagging his tail excitedly, recognizing his territory. The doorman's gaze fell to the golden retriever, and for the first time, a flicker of recognition softened his features. "Zeus, my goodness!" His tone shifted instantly from suspicion to professional concern. He looked back at Amelia. "Penthouse A, I presume?" "Yes, that's what the tag says," she said, relieved. "Mr. Blackwood will be very pleased. He was quite distressed when he called down this morning." He gestured toward the gleaming lobby doors. "Go right on up. The elevator to your right is the express to the penthouse floors." The lobby was a cathedral of wealth. Sunlight streamed through two-story windows, illuminating a vast expanse of polished marble that reflected the light like a mirror. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, its light fracturing into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Amelia felt a pang of anxiety so sharp it was almost painful. The cost of one of those crystals could probably pay her mother's medical bills for a year. She clutched Zeus's leash tighter, her one legitimate reason for being in this temple of excess. The express elevator was silent and swift, lifting her into the sky with unnerving speed. She watched the floor numbers climb, 30, 40, 50, and caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirrored walls. She saw a young woman with flushed cheeks, wind-tousled hair, and wide, worried eyes. She looked exactly like what she was, someone who was about to lose her job. The reality of her situation came crashing back. It was 8:49 a.m. Her career at Sterling & Finch was,
For all intents and purposes, over. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime directly into a private foyer. There was only one door, a massive dark wood creation with a sleek silver handle. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Amelia pressed the doorbell. For a long moment there was silence. She was about to ring it again when the door was pulled open abruptly. He wasn't what she expected. He wasn't a distinguished older gentleman in a suit. The man standing before her was young, maybe only a few years older than her, with tousled dark hair that looked like he just rolled out of bed. He was shirtless, wearing a pair of expensive-looking silk pajama pants that hung low on his hips. His face was movie star handsome, but his eyes were clouded with irritation and fatigue. His gaze went straight past Amelia to the dog. "Zos, where the hell have you been?" he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He knelt and grabbed the leash from Amelia's hand without a word of thanks, ruffling the dog's fur. "You had me worried sick, you idiot!" Amelia stood awkwardly in the doorway, feeling utterly invisible. The man was completely focused on his dog, who was now licking his face with joyful abandon. She cleared her throat. He was weaving through traffic a few blocks from the subway. I thought it was best to bring him back." The man finally stood up, looking at her properly for the first time. His eyes, a startlingly intense shade of blue, scanned her quickly, taking in her simple dress and anxious expression. He seemed to notice her not as a person, but as an unexpected variable in his day. "Right, thanks," he said dismissively, turning as if to close the door. A spark of indignation cut through Amelia's anxiety. She hadn't risked her livelihood to be dismissed like a delivery service. "You're welcome," she said, her voice a little sharper than she intended. "Look, I really have to go. I'm incredibly late for work because of this."
At the word work, he stopped. He turned back slowly, and his expression changed. The irritation was gone, replaced by a strange, calculating intensity. It was as if 1,000 complex equations were running behind his eyes. He looked at her kind face, her simple, unassuming clothes, the genuine panic in her eyes about being late for a job. She was normal. She was real. She wasn't from his world of heiresses and socialites. And in that instant, a disparate, audacious idea bloomed in his mind. "Wait," he said, his voice suddenly commanding. Before Amelia could react, he stepped forward, his hand closing gently but firmly around her arm. He pulled her over the threshold into the stunning, sun-drenched penthouse. With his other hand, he swung the colossal door shut. It closed with a heavy, final click, the sound echoing in the sudden silence of the apartment. Amelia's heart leaped into her throat. She was trapped. "What are you doing?" she gasped, trying to pull her arm away. He didn't let go, but his grip wasn't threatening. It was purposeful. He looked down at her, his blue eyes boring into hers with a seriousness that was completely at odds with his disheveled appearance. "You said you're going to be late for your job," he stated, his voice low and certain. "Don't worry about it. You won't be needing it anymore." "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her mind racing with confusion and fear. "Who are you?" A humorless smile touched his lips. "My name is Damian Blackwood, and I'm talking about the fact," he said, pausing for a beat, letting the sheer insanity of his next words hang in the air, "that you are going to marry me." For a full 10 seconds, Amelia did nothing but stare. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the sounds of the city far below fading into a dull, distant roar. Her mind, already frazzled from her chaotic morning, struggled to process the words he had just spoken. Marry me? It had to be a joke, a twisted, cruel joke played by a bored billionaire on the frazzled girl who returned his dog. She finally found her voice, a mix of disbelief and rising anger. "Are you insane?" she snapped, yanking her arm free from his grasp. "Let me out of here, right now, or I swear I will scream and I will call the police." Damian didn't flinch. He simply leaned back against the heavy door, crossing his arms over his chest, effectively blocking her only exit. His expression wasn't threatening, but it was unnervingly calm. Every instinct told her to run, but she was trapped, and a sliver of desperate curiosity took root in her heart. What could possibly compel a man like him to say something so crazy to a complete stranger? 5 minutes, she said, her voice trembling slightly. And don't come any closer. He nodded, gesturing toward the vast living room. Deal. The apartment was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering a panoramic view of Central Park that looked like a living painting. The furniture was sleek and minimalist, the art on the walls looked priceless, and yet the space felt cold, impersonal. A beautiful, empty box. Zeus had already made himself comfortable on a ridiculously plush rug, chewing on a toy. My father, Jonathan Blackwood, is the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. He's retiring in 3 months. The board is set to name me as his successor, but there's a condition. He paused, his jaw tightening. My father doesn't trust me. He sees my lifestyle, the parties, the women, the headlines and the gossip columns, and he thinks I'm not serious enough to protect our family's legacy. He thinks I'm a liability. Amelia stared at him, saying nothing. She had seen faces like his in magazines at the grocery store checkout. Billionaire playboy Damian Blackwood's latest fling. He wasn't wrong about his reputation. So, he continued, I gave him an ultimatum. A ridiculous, archaic ultimatum. I have to be married, or at least engaged, by the time of the annual shareholders' gala, which is in 2 weeks. He believes a wife will demonstrate stability, maturity, that it will calm the nerves of the older members of the board. If I'm not engaged, he'll pass me over and name my cousin, a man who has the charisma of a filing cabinet, as CEO. Amelia finally understood. A flicker of pity was quickly extinguished by indignation. Okay, so you need a wife. Why me? Go call one of the supermodels you're always photographed with. Why would you pick a complete stranger off the street? Precisely because you're a stranger, he said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. Any woman from my world comes with baggage, family alliances, their own ambitions, reporters digging into their past. They would try to make it real. It would be messy. You? He looked up and down at her again, but this time it felt less judgmental and more like an assessment. You're perfect. You're normal. You were kind enough to stop and rescue my dog even when you were in a rush. That tells me you have character. And you were panicked about being late for your job, which tells me you need money. The cold, transactional nature of his words felt like a slap in the face. He was analyzing her like a stock portfolio. This wouldn't be a real marriage, he said, quickly sensing her offense. It would be a contract, a business deal. You play the part of my adoring fiancé for 1 year. Attend a few dinners, smile for the cameras at the gala, meet my family. After a year, we announce a quiet, amicable separation. No one gets hurt, and the board is satisfied. I can see you're worried about your job and your future. I can make those worries disappear. For the 1-year duration of our arrangement, I will pay you $50,000 a month. It will be wired to an account of your choosing on the 1st of every month. No questions asked. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. $50,000 a month. That was more than she made in an entire year. He wasn't finished. When the year is up and our divorce is finalized, you will receive a one-time final payment of $1 million. You'll be free to go, to start whatever life you want, wherever you want. You solve my very specific short-term problem, and I solve your financial ones permanently. It's clean.
The room began to spin. The numbers were so large they didn't feel real. Her mind, accustomed to budgeting for groceries down to the last cent, struggled to comprehend the scale of it. Then, slowly, the implications began to crash down on her. $50,000 a month. The thought was a tidal wave. Mom's medical bills? They would be gone. She could see the best specialists in the country. No more fighting with insurance, no more second-rate clinics. She could have the care she deserved. And $1 million? A sob almost escaped her lips. My student loans. I could pay them off in a single transaction. I would be free. I would never again have to wake up in a panic, racing to a job I hate,
terrified of a single misstep. This wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was safety for her mother. It was a future. It was the answer to every desperate whispered prayer. And the price was 1 year of her life, a lie worn like a diamond ring. Just then, a shrill, angry buzzing sound cut through the silence. Amelia looked down at her worn handbag. Her phone was vibrating against the leather. The screen lit up, illuminating 2 words that made her blood run cold. Mr. Thompson. The call was a brutal reminder of the world waiting for her outside this penthouse, a world where she was powerless, in debt, and about to be unemployed. Damian noticed her terrified glance at the buzzing phone. He couldn't see the name, but he could read the panic on her face. "That's your old life calling, Amelia," he said softly. "A world of problems I can make disappear. You can answer it, or you can hang up and choose a new one." Her phone continued to buzz, a frantic, insistent demand. She looked from the phone to the impossible view of the city, and finally into the intense blue eyes of the handsome, desperate billionaire who was offering her a deal with the devil. Damian's words hung in the air. "You can answer it, or you can choose a new one." Amelia's hand, trembling, reached for the phone. For a heartbeat, Damian's calm expression tightened, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He thought she was going to answer, to retreat back to the life he couldn't control. Her fingers wrapped around the smooth plastic. She stared at the name of the man who held her tiny future in his hands, the man who likely wouldn't think twice about replacing her by noon. She thought of his condescending tone, of the constant anxiety he caused her. Then she thought of her mother's tired smile, of the stack of bills on her counter, and the impossible number Damian had just named. With a sharp, decisive movement, she pressed the red button on the screen, silencing the call. But she didn't stop there. She held the power button down, watching as the screen went black, severing her connection to that life completely. The buzzing stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. She placed the lifeless phone back on the table and looked up at Damian, her eyes clear and steady for the first time that day. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with a terrifying resolve. "I'll do it." A wave of palpable relief washed over Damian's face, so quick it was almost imperceptible before his cool businesslike mask slipped back into place. This wasn't a victory, it was a transaction completed. "Good," he said, his tone crisp. "My lawyer has the contract drawn up. He'll be here this afternoon to walk you through the specifics. I advise you to read it carefully." He walked over to a panel on the wall and pressed a button. "I'm having my head of staff, Mrs. Gable, come up. She'll handle the logistics." "Logistics?" Amelia asked, feeling like she'd just been cast in a play without ever seeing the script. "Your apartment, your belongings. You'll be living here, obviously. Give Mrs. Gable your address and a key. She and her team will pack up anything you want and move it here by this evening. The rest will be put in storage. It needs to be done today." Amelia's stomach churned. The idea of strangers going through her small private space, packing up her life into boxes, was deeply unsettling. She was losing her home, her sanctuary, in the span of an afternoon. Damian seemed to read her mind. "It's better this way. A clean break." Then he looked at her dress, a critical eye scanning her from head to toe. "Which brings us to the next point. You can't meet my family looking like that." The words weren't intentionally cruel, just a statement of fact. "My personal shopper, Celeste, will be here within an hour. She has your measurements, or an approximation. Get anything you need: clothes, shoes, jewelry. The account has no limit. From now on, you are Amelia Reed, a woman who belongs in this world." He paused, pulling a tablet from his desk. "Which brings us to your new identity. We can't very well tell people the truth." He scrolled for a moment. "We met a month ago at a silent auction for the Children's Art Foundation.
I was immediately taken by your passion for the arts. You are a freelance art historian, specializing in the Italian Renaissance. It's sophisticated, explains why you might not have a steady 9 to 5, and is boring enough that most people won't ask too many follow-up questions. I've prepared a dossier for you. My family, close friends, business associates. Our likes, our dislikes. Key dates. You need to learn it. You're an actress now, and this is the role of a lifetime. It was too much. Her brain was short-circuiting. A new job, a new home, a new life story, all handed to her in the span of 10 minutes. Before she could protest, a chime sounded, and an elegant older woman in a severe black dress entered the room. Mrs. Gable. The next few hours were a blur. While Mrs. Gable took down the details of her old life with chilling efficiency, Celeste, the personal shopper, arrived with a team that rolled in rack after rack of designer clothes, dresses made of silk and cashmere, shoes with red soles, handbags that cost more than she made in 3 months. Amelia was pushed and pulled, measured and styled, her simple brown hair and makeup-free face transformed by another team of strangers.
At one point, she found herself alone in a cavernous walk-in closet, staring at her reflection in a 3-way mirror. She was wearing a simple but exquisitely cut emerald green dress that shimmered when she moved. Her hair was in soft waves, her face expertly made up to look naturally flawless. She looked beautiful. She looked powerful. She looked like a complete and utter stranger. She instinctively reached for the simple, faded string bracelet on her wrist, a gift from her mother. It was the only thing in the entire room that was truly hers. A soft knock came at the door. "Are you ready?" It was Damian. She took a deep breath and stepped out. He was standing by the window, now dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit. He turned as she approached, and for the very first time, the calculated, business-like look in his eyes vanished. It was replaced by a flash of genuine, unbridled surprise. He wasn't looking at his business partner anymore. He was looking at a beautiful woman. The moment passed as quickly as it came, and his professional mask was back, but she had seen it. "Good," he said, his voice a little thicker than before. "You look the part." He straightened his tie, all business once again. Now for the hard part. Put on a convincing smile. "Why?" Amelia asked, her heart beginning to pound a nervous rhythm against her ribs. He offered her his arm, his expression grim. "Because we're having dinner with my father. Tonight." The ride to the Blackwood estate was a silent, nerve-wracking journey through a city that now seemed alien to Amelia. They sat in the plush leather back seat of a gleaming black Rolls-Royce, a car so quiet it felt like being in a soundproof vault. The glittering lights of Manhattan slid past the tinted windows, but Amelia saw none of it. Her focus was entirely on the tablet in her lap, her eyes scanning the dossier Damian had prepared. Jonathan Blackwood, age 68, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises for 40 years, widower. Hobbies: chess, collecting first edition books, macroeconomic theory. Dislikes: modern art, tardiness, displays of emotion in business. Avoid mentioning his late brother, Robert. The list went on, a dizzying collection of facts she was supposed to absorb and embody. So he enjoys arguing about fiscal policy, but hates art made after 1920. This is impossible. Damian, who had been staring out the window with a clenched jaw, turned to her. He was tense too. That easy confidence he projected in his penthouse was gone, replaced by the grim focus of a soldier heading into battle. "My father is a shark, Amelia. He smells fear and weakness. The worst thing you can do is act intimidated." He reached over and gently closed the tablet.
You've read enough. The facts are just background. The only thing that matters tonight is this. Look him in the eye. Don't apologize for who you are, and do not let him see you're scared. He doesn't respect people who agree with him. He respects people who can hold their ground. His advice was terrifying, but it was also the first truly genuine thing he had said to her. It wasn't about the contract. It was about survival. The car soon left the city behind, pulling through a set of massive wrought iron gates and cruising down a long, tree-lined driveway. At the end stood not a modern mansion, but a formidable stone house that looked more like a fortress. It was old money personified, grand, imposing, and built to last for centuries. A stoic butler in a black suit opened the car door. "Mr. Blackwood, welcome home. Your father is waiting in the study." The inside of the house was just as intimidating as the outside. Dark wood paneling, heavy velvet curtains, and the solemn faces of Blackwood ancestors staring down from portraits on the walls. The air was still and smelled faintly of old books and polish. Each step Amelia took on the oriental rug felt like an intrusion. They were led to the study, where a fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, and there, standing with his back to them and looking into the flames, was Jonathan Blackwood. He turned as they entered, and Amelia felt her breath catch. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a gray suit, with a full head of silver hair, and eyes so sharp and intelligent they seemed to see right through her. He radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable control. "Damian," he said, his voice a calm, deep baritone. He offered a brisk nod to his son before his piercing gaze landed on Amelia. "Father, this is Amelia Reed," Damian said, placing a steadying hand on the small of Amelia's back. "Miss Reed," he said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, brief, and felt like a test. "My son has told me very little about you." Dinner was an exercise in supreme tension. They sat at a long, polished mahogany table in a dining room that could seat 30. The food was served by silent staff, each course more exquisite than the last, but Amelia barely tasted it. Jonathan directed the entire conversation, and it was clear from the start that this was not a social call. It was an interrogation. "Damian mentioned you are an art historian, Miss Reed," he began, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. "A noble, if financially precarious, profession. Tell me, what is your opinion on the commodification of post-war abstract expressionism? A true art form or a clever tax evasion scheme for the nouveau riche?" Her mind raced. It was a classic trap, designed to make her either agree with his implied cynicism or defend a position she didn't understand. She remembered Damian's advice: "Hold your ground." "I think it can be both, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Some collectors are certainly just investing, but an artist like Rothko, I don't think you can stand in front of one of his color fields and not feel something profound. True art will always transcend the market that tries to contain it." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. It wasn't the answer he expected. A diplomatic response. He moved on. "And your family, the Reeds? I'm not familiar with the name in New York." "You wouldn't be, sir. My family is from Ohio. My father was a high school history teacher. My mother is a retired nurse." There's no shame in her voice, only fact.
The questioning continued, a relentless but subtle assault on her knowledge, her background, and her motivations. Damian tried to interject, to deflect, but his father would skillfully steer the conversation right back to Amelia. She felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, but she refused to struggle. Finally, as dessert was served, Jonathan placed his fork and knife down and leveled his gaze at his son. "This is all very sudden, Damian. You have a well-documented history of fleeting interests. You must understand my skepticism when you suddenly produce a fiancée out of thin air, a perfectly charming woman, but one with no connections, no background to speak of." The challenge had been issued. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire from the next room. Damian met his father's gaze without flinching. "Perhaps that's how I know it's real, Father," he said, his voice low and firm. "For the first time in my life, I've met someone who is utterly unimpressed by the Blackwood name, someone who isn't part of a business strategy or a social maneuver, and I fell in love with her." He turned to Amelia, and for a moment the lie in his eyes looked dangerously close to the truth. Amelia, emboldened, reached over and placed her hand on Damian's, a simple supportive gesture that did not go unnoticed by his father. "Your son is a good man, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly, looking directly at him. "I hope, in time, you'll come to see the man I see." The rest of the evening was a quiet affair. As they were preparing to leave, Jonathan stopped Amelia at the door. "It was illuminating meeting you, Miss Reed," he said, his expression unreadable. It was not an acceptance, nor was it a dismissal. It was the verdict of a judge who had decided to reserve his final ruling. Back in the silent cocoon of the Rolls-Royce, Amelia finally let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 hours. Her entire body ached with tension. She had survived. She looked over at Damian, who was staring at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. It was pure, unadulterated respect. "You did it," he whispered, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I've never seen anyone stand up to him like that." For the first time, Amelia felt a flicker of something other than fear or obligation. It was a strange, unfamiliar sense of partnership. They had passed the first test together. The days following the dinner at the Blackwood estate settled into a strange and surreal routine. Amelia was living a life ripped from the pages of a magazine, but it felt hollow, like a beautiful, empty room. She woke up each morning in a bed the size of her old apartment, the sunlight streaming in through windows that overlooked a sleeping Central Park. Her closet was a boutique of designer clothes she was scared to touch, and her meals were prepared by a private chef who asked for her preferences, a question she had never been in a position to consider. She had everything money could buy except for her own life. Damian was surprisingly dedicated to his new role as the serious heir. He spent his days at the Blackwood Enterprises headquarters, locked in meetings with his father and the board, preparing for the transition of power. He would return late in the evening, tired and stressed, and they would share a quiet, formal dinner, rehearsing details of their fictional romance for the next inevitable test. The gilded cage of the penthouse became her world. She was profoundly lonely. Her old phone remained off, a black mirror of a life that no longer existed. What could she possibly say to her friends? "Hi, I dropped off the face of the earth to become the fake fiancé of a billionaire." She called her mother once on a new phone Damian had provided, telling a carefully crafted lie about a demanding new job as a personal assistant that required all of her time. The guilt of lying to the one person she was doing all this for was a physical ache in her chest. About a week after the dinner at the Blackwood estate, Damian came home earlier than usual, holding 2 thick, cream-colored envelopes. "Time for our public debut," he said, handing one to her. It was an invitation to the annual Starlight Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the biggest society event of the season. Everyone will be there, reporters, photographers, and every important person in this city. This is our real test. We need to be convincing.
Amelia's heart sank. Hiding in the penthouse was one thing, performing on the city's biggest stage was another. 2 nights later, she was a stranger to herself once again. She wore a breathtaking midnight blue gown that shimmered with every movement, and a diamond necklace that Damian's jeweler had delivered that afternoon rested against her collarbone. It was so heavy, so cold, it felt like a beautiful leash. As they stepped out of the car onto the red carpet, the night exploded in a blinding cacophony of flashing lights and shouted questions. "Damian, who is she? Mr. Blackwood, is this the one? Look this way." Damian's arm was a steel band around her waist, guiding her through the chaos with a practiced ease. "Smile," he murmured in her ear, his voice low. "They're like sharks. Don't show them you're bleeding." Inside, the gala was a swirling galaxy of power and wealth. Amelia clung to Damian's arm as he navigated the crowd, introducing her to titans of industry and influential politicians. She played her part, smiling, reciting her lines about art history, and trying to ignore the calculating eyes that followed her every move. They were doing it. They were actually pulling it off. And then a voice, smooth as silk and sharp as glass, cut through the din. "Well, well, Damian Blackwood, I never thought I'd see the day." A woman emerged from the crowd, gliding toward them with the predatory grace of a panther. She was stunningly beautiful in a severe, blood-red dress. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek, tight chignon. Her smile was a perfect, bright red slash, but it didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. Damian's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Elise," he said, his voice clipped, "I didn't know you were back in town." "I just flew in this morning. I wouldn't miss this for the world," she said, her eyes sliding right past Damian to fixate on Amelia. She looked Amelia up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that was insulting and intimidating. "So, this is the mystery woman, the one who finally managed to do what the rest of us couldn't." She extended a hand, her nails perfectly manicured. "Elise Schneider, it's a pleasure." Amelia took her hand. It was ice cold. "Amelia Reed." "Elise," she repeated, tasting the name. "Damian and I are old friends. We were just in St. Bart's together a few weeks ago. It's funny, he never mentioned you. This must have been quite the whirlwind."
It was a direct hit, a public challenge to their story. Amelia felt a flush of panic, but Damian's grip on her waist tightened, a silent signal of support. Before Amelia could respond, Elise pressed her attack, a shark scenting blood. "Damian tells me you're an art historian. How utterly fascinating. As a benefactor of the museum, I'm always interested in a professional's opinion. What do you make of the new sculpture exhibit? A bold recontextualization of postmodernism? Or just a derivative mess?" She had an audience now. Several people nearby had stopped their own conversations to listen, intrigued by the unfolding drama. This was Elise's stage, and she had just cast Amelia as the fool. Amelia's mind flashed back to the dinner with Jonathan, to Damian's advice, "Hold your ground." She looked Elise directly in the eye, a calm smile gracing her lips. "I think terms like postmodernism and derivative are what critics use to sound smart at cocktail parties," Amelia said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm more interested in what the art makes people feel. It's meant to provoke a reaction. Clearly, it's provoked a strong one in you. What did you think of it, Elise?" A flicker of shock, then fury crossed her face. She had been expertly disarmed and put on the defensive. The people listening let out a few soft murmurs of amusement. Damian seized the opening. "If you'll excuse us, Elise," he said, his tone final. He put his arm around Amelia, turning her away. "It was so good to see you." He led her toward the grand staircase, leaving Elise standing alone, her perfect red smile now a thin, hard line. As they walked away, Amelia glanced over her shoulder. Elise was watching them,
Her eyes narrowed into icy slits. The mask of civility was gone, replaced with a look of pure, unadulterated animosity. "My God!" Amelia whispered to Damian once they were out of earshot, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who is she?" Damian's expression was grim. He looked back at Elise, who was now speaking intently to another guest, her eyes still fixed on them. "That," he said, his voice low and serious, "was a declaration of war." The heavy door of the Rolls-Royce closed, shutting out the world and encasing them in a bubble of profound silence. The adrenaline from the confrontation drained away, leaving Amelia feeling shaky and hollow. She leaned her head back against the cool leather, the weight of the diamond necklace suddenly unbearable. "I can't believe I said that to her," she whispered, her own voice sounding foreign to her ears. "My heart is going to beat its way out of my chest." Damian let out a long, slow breath. He wasn't looking at her, but staring out at the blurred city lights, his jaw tight. "What you did back there, you have no idea. You didn't just win a verbal spat, Amelia. You showed the entire room that you weren't afraid of her. In our world, that's like drawing a line in the sand." He finally turned to face her, his expression deadly serious. "I need you to understand what you're up against. Elise isn't just a jealous ex-girlfriend. Her father, Edward Schneider, sits on my father's board of directors. He controls a 12% stake in Blackwood Enterprises. For years, our fathers have been quietly planning a merger to be solidified by our marriage. It was a dynastic strategy." Amelia's blood ran cold. This was so much bigger than she could ever have imagined. "Elise doesn't want me," Damian continued, his voice low and intense. "She wants the power that comes with being the next Mrs. Blackwood. She wants to be the queen. By standing next to me, you are not just an inconvenience, you are a roadblock to a multi-billion-dollar corporate alliance. She will not stop. She will use every resource she has to dig into your past and find a way to destroy you, to expose this entire arrangement. She's not just trying to win me back, she's trying to close the biggest deal of her life." They arrived back at the penthouse, the silence stretching between them, now filled with the weight of this new, terrifying reality. As the elevator doors opened into the apartment, Amelia stepped out and immediately bent down, pulling off the painful designer heels with a sigh of relief. She padded barefoot across the cold marble floor, the simple human act, a stark contrast to the goddess-like image she had projected all evening. Damian watched her, his expression unreadable. The confident CEO air was gone, replaced by a man who looked weary and burdened. Without a word, he walked past the bar, went into the vast gleaming kitchen, a room she had never seen him enter, and opened the refrigerator. He came back with 2 bottles of cold water and handed one to her. It was a simple, strangely domestic gesture that felt more intimate than anything that had happened between them. They stood in the middle of the enormous living room, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. "Were you ever in love with her?" asked Amelia quietly, unable to stop herself. Damian took a long drink of water before answering. "No," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I don't think either of us knows how. It was always a transaction, an understanding." He paused, a flicker of something dark crossing his face. "Just like—" He cut himself off, but the words hung in the air between them. "Just like us." The unspoken truth of their own arrangement suddenly felt coarse and cheap. To break the uncomfortable silence, Amelia offered a piece of her own truth. "I've never been in a room with so much money before," she confessed, looking out the window. "The way those people look at you, it's like you're not a person. You're an idea, a prize." A humorless, sad smile touched Damian's lips. "Welcome to my life," he said softly. "You stop being a person and just become the Blackwood heir. The name enters the room before you do. It's the loneliest place in the world." For the first time, she saw a crack in his perfectly polished armor. She saw not the billionaire, not her fake fiancé, but a man trapped in his own gilded cage. They were both playing a part. They were both profoundly alone.
An unfamiliar silence settled between them, charged with something new and unnamed. He was standing closer now. He noticed the faint indentation the necklace had left on her skin, and the way a single strand of her carefully styled hair had fallen across her cheek. Almost unconsciously, he raised his hand, his fingers gently brushing the stray strand to tuck it behind her ear. His touch was electric, a spark of warmth in the cold, contractual world they had built. Her breath hitched. His eyes dropped from her hair to her lips. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with possibility. Suddenly, the shrill electronic beep of the internal comm system shattered the moment. "Mr. Blackwood, sir. Mrs. Gable just confirming your 7 a.m. call with the London office." The spell was broken. Damian flinched back as if burned, clearing his throat and stepping away, his businesslike mask firmly back in place. The brief, vulnerable connection was severed. "Right, of course," he said to the air. He turned back to Amelia, his gaze now carefully neutral. "You were brilliant tonight, Amelia. Thank you." The thank you was different this time. It wasn't from a boss to an employee. It was from an ally, a partner. "Good night," she whispered, turning and walking toward the guest wing, her bare feet silent on the marble. She closed the door to her cavernous bedroom and leaned against it, her heart pounding for an entirely new reason. The threat of Elise was terrifying, and the thought of Jonathan Blackwood's scrutiny was chilling. But as she stood there, her fingers tracing the spot where he had touched her, she realized a new, far more dangerous complication had just entered the game. The man himself. The fragile intimacy of that night lingered in the air for days. A new, unspoken awareness existed between them. A shared glance across the breakfast table held a different weight. A casual brush of hands as he left for the office sent a jolt through Amelia. They were both acutely aware of the line they had almost crossed, and they were both meticulously careful not to get near it again. But the seed was planted. This quiet, budding partnership, however, was a flower trying to grow in the path of a hurricane. And the hurricane had a name: Elise Schneider. The attack came not as a direct confrontation, but as a silent, venomous strike. It was a Tuesday morning. Amelia was drinking coffee, looking out at the city, when Damian strode into the room, his face like a thundercloud. He wasn't holding a business report, he was holding a tablet, and he slammed it down on the marble island. On the screen was the homepage of New York's most notorious high society gossip column. The headline was splashed across the top in bold, accusatory letters. "Who is Amelia Reed? Insiders question billionaire Blackwood's mystery fiancé." Amelia's blood ran cold as she read the article. It was a masterpiece of subtle character assassination. The anonymous author, who Amelia knew was fed by Elise, questioned how a supposed art historian had no academic publications, no social media presence, no digital footprint whatsoever. It quoted unnamed friends of the Blackwood family, who expressed concern that Damian, in his haste, had fallen for a woman with a questionable and unverifiable background. The article ended by wistfully mentioning Elise Schneider as the talented and respected society darling everyone assumed he would one day marry, painting Amelia nothing more than a suspicious interloper, a gold digger. The fallout was instantaneous. Within the hour, Damian received a call. I could only hear his side of the conversation, but the rigid set of his shoulders and his terse, respectful replies told me everything. It was his father. "Yes, father, I've seen it. I understand. No, it is not a circus. I will handle it." He hung up, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. "The board is getting nervous," he said, his voice dangerously low. "My father is furious. He gave me one command: fix this." The gilded cage had become a fishbowl. Suddenly, Amelia was no longer just a resident of the penthouse. She was a prisoner. when a car dropped her at a high-end bookstore Damian had suggested she visit to keep up appearances, she felt the stares. She saw the whispers behind cupped hands, the glint of phone cameras capturing her picture from across the street. She was no longer a person. She was a headline, a scandal. That night, she huddled in her massive, lonely room, scrolling through the comments on the online article. They were brutal. Gold digger. She looks cheap. He can do so much better. I give it 6 months. Probably signed an ironclad NDA. Each word was a tiny, sharp cut. She had made this deal to save her mother, to give her a life free of worry. But what if this poison reached her? What if her mother, in her small town in Ohio, saw these headlines? The shame was a suffocating weight. She felt like she had sold not just her time, but her very integrity, her family's good name. Her eyes fell on the simple string bracelet on her wrist. She remembered the day her mother had given it to her just before she left for New York. "This world will try to tell you who you are, Amy," her mother had said, her voice warm and steady. "It will try to put a price tag on you. Don't ever let it. Your character is the one thing you own outright." A sob escaped Amelia's lips. She had let them put a price tag on her, and now they were trying to take her character too. With a surge of desperate energy, she stormed out of her room and found Damian in his study, staring grimly at a stock market ticker. She held up her own tablet, the vicious article glowing on the screen. "I can't do this, Damian. I can't. This isn't what I agreed to. To be humiliated like this, to have my name dragged through the mud. My mother, what if she sees this? This has to stop." He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw the guilt in his eyes. He saw her genuine pain, and knew unequivocally that he had caused it. The old Damian, the playboy, might have reminded her of the contract. But this man, the one who had seen her stand up to his father, the one whose hand he had almost held, just shook his head. "You're right," he said, his voice rough. "You never should have been put in this position. This is my world, my fight, and it's my fault it spilled over onto you." He stood up and took the tablet from her hands, setting it face down on his desk. "But we can't stop now. If we end this, she wins. She will leak the truth anyway, just to ruin me. My father will cut me off for good. Everything we've done will be for nothing." An unfamiliar silence settled between them, charged with something new and unnamed. He was standing closer now. He noticed the faint indentation the necklace had left on her skin, and the way a single strand of her carefully styled hair had fallen across her cheek. Almost unconsciously, he raised his hand, his fingers gently brushing the stray strand to tuck it behind her ear. His touch was electric, a spark of warmth in the cold, contractual world they had built. Her breath hitched. His eyes dropped from her hair to her lips. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with possibility. Suddenly, the shrill electronic beep of the internal comm system shattered the moment. "Mr. Blackwood, sir. Mrs. Gable just confirming your 7 a.m. call with the London office." The spell was broken. Damian flinched back as if burned, clearing his throat and stepping away, his businesslike mask firmly back in place. The brief, vulnerable connection was severed. "Right, of course," he said to the air. He turned back to Amelia, his gaze now carefully neutral. "You were brilliant tonight, Amelia. Thank you." The thank you was different this time. It wasn't from a boss to an employee. It was from an ally, a partner. "Good night," she whispered, turning and walking toward the guest wing, her bare feet silent on the marble. She closed the door to her cavernous bedroom and leaned against it, her heart pounding for an entirely new reason. The threat of Elise was terrifying, and the thought of Jonathan Blackwood's scrutiny was chilling. But as she stood there, her fingers tracing the where he had touched her, she realized a new, far more dangerous complication had just entered the game. The man himself. The fragile intimacy of that night lingered in the air for days. A new, unspoken awareness existed between them. A shared glance across the breakfast table held a different weight. A casual brush of hands as he left for the office sent a jolt through Amelia. They were both acutely aware of the line they had almost crossed, and they were both meticulously careful not to get near it again. But the seed was planted. This quiet, budding partnership, however, was a flower trying to grow in the path of a hurricane. And the hurricane had a name: Elise Schneider. The attack came not as a direct confrontation, but as a silent, venomous strike. It was a Tuesday morning. Amelia was drinking coffee, looking out at the city, when Damian strode into the room, his face like a thundercloud. He wasn't holding a business report, he was holding a tablet, and he slammed it down on the marble island. On the screen was the homepage of New York's most notorious high society gossip column. The headline was splashed across the top in bold, accusatory letters. "Who is Amelia Reed? Insiders question billionaire Blackwood's mystery fiancé." Amelia's blood ran cold as she read the article. It was a masterpiece of subtle character assassination. The anonymous author, who Amelia knew was fed by Elise, questioned how a supposed art historian had no academic publications, no social media presence, no digital footprint whatsoever. It quoted unnamed friends of the Blackwood family, who expressed concern that Damian, in his haste, had fallen for a woman with a questionable and unverifiable background. The article ended by wistfully mentioning Elise Schneider as the talented and respected society darling everyone assumed he would one day marry, painting Amelia nothing more than a suspicious interloper, a gold digger. The fallout was instantaneous. Within the hour, Damian received a call. I could only hear his side of the conversation, but the rigid set of his shoulders and his terse, respectful replies told me everything. It was his father. "Yes, father, I've seen it. I understand. No, it is not a circus. I will handle it." He hung up, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. "The board is getting nervous," he said, his voice dangerously low. "My father is furious. He gave me one command: fix this." The gilded cage had become a fishbowl. Suddenly, Amelia was no longer just a resident of the penthouse. She was a prisoner. When a car dropped her at a high-end bookstore Damian had suggested she visit to keep up appearances, she felt the stares. She saw the whispers behind cupped hands, the glint of phone cameras capturing her picture from across the street. She was no longer a person. She was a headline, a scandal. That night she huddled in her massive, lonely room, scrolling through the comments on the online article. They were brutal. "Gold digger. She looks cheap. He can do so much better. I give it 6 months. Probably signed an ironclad NDA." Each word was a tiny, sharp cut. She had made this deal to save her mother, to give her a life free of worry. But what if this poison reached her? What if her mother, in her small town in Ohio, saw these headlines? The shame was a suffocating weight. She felt like she had sold not just her time, but her very integrity, her family's good name. Her eyes fell on the simple string bracelet on her wrist. She remembered the day her mother had given it to her just before she left for New York. "This world will try to tell you who you are, Amy," her mother had said, her voice warm and steady. "It will try to put a price tag on you. Don't ever let it. Your character is the one thing you own outright." A sob escaped Amelia's lips. She had let them put a price tag on her, and now they were trying to take her character too. With a surge of desperate energy, she stormed out of her room and found Damian in his study, staring grimly at a stock market ticker. She held up her own tablet, the vicious article glowing on the screen. "I can't do this, Damian. I can't. This isn't what I agreed to. To be humiliated like this, to have my name dragged through the mud. My mother, what if she sees this? This has to stop." He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw the guilt in his eyes. He saw her genuine pain and knew unequivocally that he had caused it. The old Damian, the playboy, might have reminded her of the contract. But this man, the one who had seen her stand up to his father, the one whose hand he had almost held, just shook his head. "You're right," he said, his voice rough. "You never should have been put in this position. This is my world, my fight, and it's my fault it spilled over onto you." He stood up and took the tablet from her hands, setting it face down on his desk. "But we can't stop now. If we end this, she wins. She will leak the truth anyway, just to ruin me. My father will cut me off for good. Everything we've done will be for nothing."
He looked at her, a new, fierce determination in his eyes. Hiding from this won't work. Trying to ignore it will only make them dig harder. She wants a story? Fine. He began to pace the room, a plan forming in his mind. Elise's entire attack is based on the idea that you're a mystery, that no one knows you. So we're going to change that. We're not going to hide. We're going to do the exact opposite. He stopped and faced her, his idea both brilliant and utterly terrifying. We're going to give them an exclusive primetime interview with someone famous, someone respected. We will sit down side by side and tell the entire world our love story. We will answer every question, fill in every blank. We will give them a performance so convincing, so real, he said, stepping closer, that by the end of it, the entire world will be in love with you. Amelia stared at him, horrified. Lie? Not just to a few people at a dinner party, but to millions of people on live television. The risk of a single slip-up, a single wrong answer, was catastrophic. It was the biggest gamble she could possibly imagine. "They won't just be watching us, Damian," she whispered. "They'll be watching our every breath, waiting for us to fail." "I know," he said, his voice grim, "but it's the only move we have left." The days leading up to the interview were a pressure cooker. The penthouse was no longer a home, but a war room. The awkward distance between Amelia and Damian evaporated, replaced by the focused intensity of two soldiers preparing for the same battle. They were a team, united against the world. Their life became a frantic montage of preparation. They spent hours crafting their shared fictional history. Damian would grill her relentlessly, transforming from partner to prosecutor in a split second. "First date? Where was it?" "The Italian place on the west side. You spilled wine on your shirt." "What's my mother's maiden name?" "Campbell. She was a painter." "What do I do when I can't sleep?" "You read old philosophy books, and you snore, a little." He gave her albums of his childhood photos, and she studied them until the images felt like her own memories. She learned the names of his cousins, his favorite vacation spot as a child, the story behind a faint scar above his eyebrow. In the process of building a perfect lie, they accidentally started sharing imperfect truths. One night, the stress became too much. "I can't do this, Damian," she cried, throwing a stack of notes onto the table. "I'm not an actress. What if she asks me something we haven't prepared for? I'm going to freeze. I'm going to ruin everything." Damian came over to her, his expression soft. He took her hands in his. "You've been acting since the day you brought Zeus home," he said gently. "You stood up to my father. You silenced Elise Schneider. You are so much stronger than you think." He looked into her terrified eyes. "When we're out there, don't look at the cameras. Don't even look at the interviewer. Just look at me. Forget the world. Just tell the story to me." The night of the interview arrived like a death sentence. They were escorted to a brightly lit television studio, the air buzzing with the quiet efficiency of the production crew. The interviewer was Catherine Vance, a journalist famous for her warm demeanor and razor-sharp questions. As they sat on the plush white couch waiting for the countdown, Amelia's hands were trembling. Damian, seeing this, covered her hand with his own, giving it a firm, reassuring squeeze. "Just me and you," he whispered. 3, 2, 1, and we're live. Catherine Vance started with a warm, welcoming smile. "Damian, Amelia, welcome. The whole world is talking about you. Tell us, how did this incredible romance begin?" They launched into their story. The charity auction, the instant connection over a shared love of art, the whirlwind courtship. They were flawless, finishing each other's sentences, sharing inside jokes, looking at each other with what appeared to be genuine adoration. The live audience was completely captivated. Then Catherine's expression shifted. Her smile remained, but her eyes sharpened. It was time for the real questions. "It is a beautiful story," she said, her voice smooth. "But your critics, Amelia, say it's just that, a story. They point to the fact that you seem to appear from nowhere. They use cruel words like gold digger. For the millions watching at home, how do you respond to that?" This was it, the moment of truth. The world held its breath. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest. She took a shaky breath, and then, remembering Damian's words, she turned away from Catherine and looked directly at him. The cameras, the audience, the world, it all melted away. There was only his face, his anxious eyes watching her. And she began to speak, not to the world, but only to him. "I know what people say," she began, her voice soft but clear, "and I don't blame them. I didn't come from this world of galas and headlines. My family's name isn't on any buildings. I know I don't look like I belong here. The truth is, my life before I met Damian, it wasn't easy. I was struggling." She saw a flicker of empathy in his eyes, and it gave her strength. "When I met Damian, I didn't see a billionaire. I didn't see the Blackwood hair. I saw a man who, despite having everything, seemed a little bit lonely. I saw a man who was kind and funny and who had this terrible habit of leaving his socks on the floor." A ripple of laughter went through the audience. Damian's lips twitched into a genuine smile. "Do I love the money?" she said, her eyes welling up with sudden, real tears. "No, honestly, it terrifies me. What I love is the man who makes me tea when he sees I'm stressed, the man who listened for an hour when I told him about my mother's rose garden and then had a book on English roses delivered the next day." She was weaving their practice sessions into a tapestry of truth. "People can call me whatever they want. They can say whatever they want. But they don't see him when the cameras are gone. I do. And he's the man I am going to marry." Her words hung in the air, raw and devastatingly convincing. The studio was utterly silent. Catherine Vance looked completely speechless, a tear shining in her own eye. Damian was staring at Amelia. His carefully constructed composure shattered. He wasn't looking at his business partner. He was looking at the woman he was falling in love with, and he had just heard her describe the man he desperately wanted to be. The audience erupted into thunderous applause, and in that moment, in front of millions of people, Damian did something that wasn't in the script. He leaned in, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste, public peck. It was a kiss full of gratitude, of awe, of a truth so powerful it obliterated the lie it was built on. The flashbulbs from the press photographers exploded, capturing the image that would be on every front page the next day.
In her sleek, modern apartment, Elise Schneider watched the television, her face a mask of disbelief, before she hurled her crystal glass against the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. And in his dark wood-paneled study, Jonathan Blackwood watched his son kiss the woman he had so deeply doubted. He saw not a performance, but a revelation, and for the first time, a slow, satisfied smile spread across his face.
He gave a single, decisive nod. The performance of a lifetime was over, and it had changed everything. The silence in the back of the Rolls-Royce was deeper than any silence they had ever shared. It wasn't an absence of sound, but a palpable presence, filled with everything that had been said, and more importantly, the kiss that was never in the script. The adrenaline of the interview faded, leaving behind a raw and undeniable truth. Amelia stared down at her own hands, twisted together in her lap. She didn't know what to say, what to feel. Their contract had clear rules, boundaries, and they had just shattered all of them in front of 10 million people. It was Damian who finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse and thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "Amelia," he began, turning to face her, "what you said up there, the way you looked at me, and what happened after, none of that was part of the plan." "I know," she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. "Look at me," he said gently. She lifted her gaze and saw a vulnerability in his eyes that was completely disarming. The billionaire, the heir, the playboy, they were all gone. There was only a man looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world. "That contract we signed was for 1 year, a business arrangement. But I don't want 1 year, Amelia. I don't want an arrangement. The story we told tonight, it started as a lie, I know. But somewhere along the way for me, it became the truth. What I told my father that first night, that I'd met someone who didn't care about the Blackwood name, and I fell in love, I was lying to him then. But I'm not lying now." Amelia's heart stopped. "I love you, Amelia," he said, the words simple and powerful. "I fell in love with the woman who was late for work to save my dog. I fell in love with the woman who stood up to my father. And tonight, I fell in love with the woman who showed the entire world her incredible heart. I don't want to perform anymore." Tears she didn't even know she was holding back began to stream down her face. "Damian," she choked out, I think I'm falling in love with you, too." A radiant smile, the first truly happy smile she had ever seen from him, lit up his face. He took her hand, not with the firmness of a business partner, but with the tenderness of a lover. "Then let's tear up the old contract. Let's start over, for real this time." He squeezed her hand. "Amelia Reed, will you marry me? Not for my father, not for the company, for me." Through her tears she laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Damian, I will." 1 year later. The Saturday morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, but the apartment was no longer the same. The vast living room, once a museum of cold, minimalist design, was now a home. There were bookshelves overflowing, not just with first editions, but with paperback novels. Framed photos covered the tables, pictures of them laughing in a park, awkwardly trying to bake a cake in the kitchen, walking on the beach with Zeus. Real memories. Amelia was curled up on a comfortable sofa, surrounded by textbooks, not a script. She was wearing glasses, her hair in a messy bun, completely absorbed in a text on artifact preservation. Damian walked into the room wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He was the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises now, a role he handled with a confidence and wisdom that surprised everyone, especially his father. But at home, he was just a man who still hadn't quite learned how to make coffee without burning it slightly. "Working hard, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, handing her a mug and kissing the top of her head. "Studying hard," she corrected with a smile. "My master's final is next week." With Damian's encouragement, she had enrolled in one of the top art curation programs in the country. He hadn't just solved her financial problems, he had given her the chance to chase the dream she never thought she could afford. The doorbell chimed, and moments later the housekeeper brought in a small package. It was a thick envelope from Ohio. Amelia opened it. Inside was a photo of her mother, looking healthier and happier than she had in years, standing in her prize-winning garden. The note read, "Can't wait to see you both for the barbecue next month. Love, Mom." The treatment, provided by the best doctors, had worked wonders. The worry that had been a constant companion in Amelia's life for so long was gone. She showed the photo to Damian. "Think you can survive a weekend without a merger or an acquisition, Mr. CEO?" He pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms. "I can survive anything," he said, his voice soft in her ear, "as long as I'm with you." Later, they stood on the balcony, looking out at the city. It was the same view that had once seemed so intimidating and lonely to Amelia. Now it was simply the view from their home. Zeus came over and rested his big head on her lap. Damian wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they watched the sunset paint the sky. It all started with a choice, a small act of kindness on a chaotic morning. Amelia Reed could never have known that the path to finding her real life would begin the moment she decided to stop to save a lost dog. She had risked a job she hated for an act of compassion, and in return, she found a love worth more than any empire. What would you have done in Amelia's place? Would you have risked it all for a stranger? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.